So, I can't lie, it's been a little while since I made one of these videos, partially because I missed a couple updates here. And I mean, can you really blame me? I mean, there's been a lot of good games coming out. You know, I can make excuses about this game or that, but for me, quite frankly, Starfield has existed, and it's taken up any free time I have, and quite frankly, I've just been busy with life. But today I actually wanted to sit down over the weekend and talk about the newest patch for Sons of the Forest. This is update number 11, and then we've also got, of course, a hot fix to look at as well. There is some interesting improvements and, additions to this, and I think it's going to be something that's really cool. So, as always, we go through the features, the improvements, the fixes, and then, of course, the audio, which overall, the fixes and improvements are much shorter lists this time around than they ever have been. But with that being said, let's go right into the features. This is your new stuff. They have added a new large battery item and revised the electricity system, which now requires them to power lights and electric fences at night, instead of course, the solar panels. They've also added limits to how many objects individual batteries and panels can power before they overload the grid, which I think that's really interesting. There's actually a balance to the electricity, which I think is really cool, and it's something I'm really excited to get into. Continuing with the electricity, solar panels can now be placed freely without relying on a support structure and can be connected to power grids with wires. Now, outside of the electricity, they've also added a new spear-throwing cannibal type Eddie. I think it's funny that they're just naming them people now. And then they've also added the new effigy placing cannibal named Greg. And it's always cool to see new enemies, especially the one throwing spears. I think that's going to be a really cool change up to the formula a little bit rather than just some rocks. But on top of that, to Cave A, they've added a new extension area. I'll be really interested to check that out. That should be fairly early on. They've also, of course, added a new item in that extension as well. And there's also a new cutscene in the food bunker, which, of course, if you've played the story, you'll know where that is. Also around, they've added some new hanging gore props, which really, to me, just adds to the atmosphere that is created with the horror of this game, leaning more into the horror over survival. Another addition is that fires will now be put out by sprinklers. I assume this is water and not like the 4th of July. You know what I mean. And then finally, they've added a new concave corner ramp placement option as well. And that's it for the new features to the game. I think the new enemies is what excites me the most. But with that being said, let's go into some of the improvements. And this is where it gets really interesting to think of in the sense of ongoing development and little changes that can be made. And these add up over time, but I'm going to read them all just to go ahead and go through them. So babies can now be exploded into gibs. I love that. I love the fact that the babies aren't just one solid form. Can I say this? Am I allowed? This is going to get me in trouble every time. And there are also now some cannibal nomad families led by Frank, the fire cannibal, starting after about 8 to 12 days in the game. Really interesting, and seeing as how I missed one of the last updates, Frank is a character I didn't know existed either, so that's really cool. Then, of course, we have hanging skeletons and new hanging gore around the fisherman huts, which once again, just like the additions earlier on, leans into the horror and that type of atmosphere. We've got corner beams now contribute to beam structural resistance, making it less likely to break easily if only corner ramps are there. Beams can now be placed leaning on another leaning beam, which allows for stacking one level of leaning beam. Going back around to the corner ramps, they no longer use a full plank for each placement. Placing full planks will split them into a smaller size when appropriate and drop a pickup matching the rest of the quarter log planks. Placing free wires on a solar panel now forces the position of the wire to the connector position on the module, so it just a little bit of a visual flair there. And then free wires connected to beams and pillars now use a wire model instead of a zip tie for the supporting ring visual. But hopping around to another improvement that was made, we'll go over to the cannibals. When one's caught on fire, but they're still alive, their material or their skin or whatever will update over time depending on their burn amount. Another improvement they've made is they've made volumetric fog more visible in bunkers. They've also improved bunker food and bunker residential lighting. I'm really excited to see that, especially with that new cutscene. They've also increased the walk speed of Puffy by about 20% and the attack speed by about 10%, overall making that a more formidable fight. And finally, for the last couple things, we have that Cave C entrance has been reworked to have less active objects above ground. They've also adjusted the near plane on the flashlight modification to prevent a cutout shape when you're reloading the shotgun with the flashlight attachment on. They've also updated the Hollow Springs logo, and finally, they've added new tutorials for using electricity. So if these improvements are what finally makes you want to use electricity, well, I guess this is your sign. But moving on, we have a rather short list of fixes compared to previous updates, but that's okay because I think, once again, it's a pretty good list. So since it's not that long, I'll go ahead and read them all real quick. They have fixed a bug where the slingshot would not animate when canceling a shot. They've also fixed a visual glitch in the loading screen when loading a saved game. They fixed the Hollow Springs video that keeps playing in single player while the game is paused. They've changed the Hollow Springs video looping behavior so that it doesn't restart every time as well. They've fixed holes in quarter log planks. The player cannot be knocked down when holding a hang glider while in the air anymore, which was devastating. Now the player being knocked down on the ground while holding the hang glider will now drop the hang glider. They've also fixed various multiplayer synchronization issues with Cave B and Cave C sluggies. Really interesting that they may only impact one enemy, but that's overall a good fix all the same, because one of the things that it seemingly is always in the multiplayer fixes is synchronization issues. Now, in multiplayer, if any player in the game has high sentiment with Virginia, the Virginia Gold Room variant cutscene will be playing for all in order to enforce proper multiplayer sync with entering the final boss fight. They've also fixed the cave shark not spawning on the low animal setting in the game settings. And they've also fixed, in a rare case of actors found in invalid positions on load, they will be removed and restored to a fixed position. For instance, Kelvin and Virginia. The end boss is now forced to stay above terrain to avoid possibly bug falling under the terrain, so you can't luck out that way either. They've also fixed issues where cannibals hitting some village structures won't play audio. They've also fixed the heavy cannibal always transitioning to walk after various auto jumps, and he's no longer going to double taunt when entering combat as well. They've also fixed some cases where the beam collapse could propagate pillars instead of stopping at the pillars. They fixed the missing sound when placing struts, along with the corner ramp placement arrow not being positioned correctly, and a corner ramp not being placeable on the beam that was supported by a leaning beam on the forward end. And if those corner ramps are damaged, they will now be visually distorted. And finally, in case you hadn't heard enough about goddamn corner ramps, they have fixed pillars added to the top of the wall in a specific order, which could prevent the placing of ramps above. And that is it for our fixes. Once again, I think it's nothing crazy, except for the fact that as you continue with these updates, you realize that the game is just more and more sound overall, and I love that. But speaking of sound, we have the audio. There's only 4 improvements here, and those are that they have added the electrical grid sounds. They've also improved that fire cannibal Frank as he is on fire, and they've also added a new sound for placing lights. And then finally, the end boss battle music will now stop while the player is dead. And that's a pretty good update overall. I like the new cannibals being added. I'm really interested to see Frank as well. So I'm really excited to hop back in, but before I do, there's 2 more things we have to discuss. First up, there was a new hotfix, which is basically a small little patch to fix any issues that could have came up during the last major update. And those fixes include music missing in the Gold Room cutscene if you had that high sentiment with Virginia. They've also fixed some issues with distant cliff meshes. They've also fixed that the new cannibals that they added not working with all of the trap types. They've also fixed the positioning of the overloaded indicator on the flat solar panels, and the bad guys not being removed from the cutscene at the end of the game. Cannibals will no longer purposely attack or climb over the effigies they build, because that's their job to take out yours, mind you. And they have also fixed some issues where the Get Down cutscene from the trailer could be played multiple times after a save and a load. And finally, they fixed stone floors getting into a bad state in some cases. But really, that's it for the update overall. Now, finally, you may be wondering, when is the next update? And I'm here to tell you very soon. At the time of recording, which I'll probably have this video out a day later or so, it's still under 2 weeks away at 12 days, making it, of course, September 28th at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which they prefer Thursday for their patches, and then with hot fixes the days after. So look forward to updates on that then, and who knows what we'll see. But regardless, let me know what you're excited for, let me know what you liked about this update, and let me know what you like about the game in general. If you want to know what I thought of the game when it first came out, I have a review on my channel, and if you're curious about previous updates, they're there as well. I will be making a comprehensive full review when that time comes, but as of right now, that's not yet. So consider subscribing for more coverage. Goodbye.